Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being with me here today. I am going to be going over today really a lot about 529 plans. There's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of social media posts that are made kind of touting how great they are. A lot of people say that it's the only way or the best way to save for college. And I really wanted to unveil the truth about 529s, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that's what my presentation today is about. Hopefully it's only going to be about a half hour, and we'll take it from there. So without further ado, let me jump into my presentation here. Let's see. Here we are. All right. So for those of you that don't know me, I am Joe Kearns. I am the most credentialed college planner in the United States today. I'm a certified college planning specialist, a certified college funding specialist, a certified college financial consultant, and education loan analyst. And I educate families on the best way for them to save for college. I can tell you that throughout today, you'll learn that there is no cookie cutter approach. There is no one best way to save for college. What someone else does is not what's best for you. A lot of people just rely on 529s when in actuality, it's not the best, specifically for that family, for their situation that lines up with their financial goals. And that's what I would like to share with you guys today. So if you are unfamiliar with what a 529 plan is, it is a tax favored vehicle. The 529 is the code from the Internal Revenue Service. And it's pretty much that you put after tax dollars and you invest it into a 529 plan. Remember that word, invest, not save. And what that does is then it grows. And when it grows, if you then use that money for qualified education expenses, you get that money tax-free. So you put after-tax money in, it grows tax-deferred, and if you use it for qualified education expenses, it's tax-free. So it can be a very good vehicle for certain people to help avoid some capital gains tax. There are some downsides, basic downsides. If you don't use that money for qualified education expenses, it can be penalized, right? 10% of your gains, and you would have to pay taxes on that as well. You're never penalized or taxed for your contributions or what's known as your cost basis. So a lot of people will say, well, what if I don't my kids don't go to college or they get a scholarship? Obviously that is a concern. You can roll over a 529. There's a lot of ins and outs, but essentially if you open a 529 with your child as the beneficiary, you keep it for a number of years, you can then roll over a certain amount each year into a Roth IRA for your kids' education. So if they were good enough to get a scholarship that you didn't need to use the 529 money, you say, hey, here's a little bit of a reward. This is your money, and you can use this to help build your retirement. So the biggest problems that I have with a 529 plan is, number one, a 529, they call it a 529 college savings plan. Well, number one, it's not a savings vehicle. It is an investment vehicle. This can gain, it can also lose. A savings vehicle does not lose money. So that's number one. Number two is they call it a plan. And again, it's nothing but an investment vehicle. A 529, if you're putting money into a 529, is not a plan. It is just a vehicle that you are using. Now, the problem is that most of the time, that's what people's plan is, but you're not actually planning with the end goal in mind. You just put money away. That's not a plan. You're just putting money into a vehicle. The big problem I have with 529s, it is very often pitched as the best way or the only way to save for college. And the truth of the matter is that there is no such financial vehicle that is the best for everyone, let alone specifically for college, right? It all comes down to your unique situation, what your time horizon is, what your goals are. That's what will essentially enlighten you on what the best vehicles are to use that line up with your situation and with your goals. Some other problems I have with 529s, like I said, it doesn't really start with the end in mind on how is this really going to fit into my full financial picture. It can also reduce the eligibility for financial aid, which in turn can increase the cost of college. And I'm sure a lot of people are aware of that. And when we talk about 529s, and again, I see this on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube all the time about how great they are, there are some major problems with how I have advisors or just general people that have the slimmest of knowledge about college financial aid, how it actually works. So what you'll typically hear is that, oh, we'll put $100 away or $50 away, but you'll come up with a dollar. You'll hear, oh, put a certain dollar amount away. And then they'll look and say, okay, well, this 529, the investment portfolio that it's in, over the past 18 years, it's had a 10% rate of return. So if we add that rate of return to your investment, it'll grow each year. And then you can use the gains on this to pay for education costs, and you avoid any taxes on those gains. It sounds great. But essentially what they're pitching is what's known as a compound rate of return. So every single year, that money grows. There is never a down year. So if they pitch a 10% rate of return, you put in $1,000, well, it's now $1,100, right? The year after that, it's that $1,100 compounded by another 10% gain plus what you put in. So it's always this straight line up. And the reality is that investments don't work that way. There are ups and downs in the market. And when you compare the two together, right, there can be a significant difference on what you were shown a long time ago and what your account balance really is. Also, by the way, there are fees on 529 plans. They don't invest your money for free, so you also have to take that into account. Now, the other way that you'll hear advisors kind of pitch why to use a 529 plan is you have young kids and you say, look, I want to be able to give this gift of education and I want to be able to cover 100% of the costs so my kids don't graduate with any debt. Hey, that's a great goal to have. But what they will then say is, all right, well, let's look at what the cost of school is today. And let's say that schools increase their cost 5% every year. So 18 years from now, there will be a big price difference between what schools costs now and what they cost in the future. So basically, if you're looking at saying a state school right now, if it costs $30,000 a year, in 18 years, it'll cost $82,000 a year. And if you're looking at the cost of a private school, you're basically saying, well, if that costs $80,000 a year right now, it's going to cost $220,000 per year, 18 years from now. And based on those numbers, here's how much you need to save per month to achieve that, right? So obviously the cost of school goes up year over year, but they'll kind of use this to pretty much say, well, there's no way you're going to be able to afford a private education, right? You're not going to pay almost $1 million for your kid's education. So let's focus on the state school, the much more appropriate number. Now, one of the big problems with this is they use that same pitch of, I'm going to show you what compound interest will grow. And they'll say, all right, if you want to hit that, $200,000 a year number, you have to put in $1,200 a month. Or if you want to hit that lower number for the state schools, right, to get that $80,000 a year, you have to put in $450 a month, right, over the next 18 years. And so they'll show you, okay, well, if you put in $450 a month based on that compound growth, well, they're going to pitch you that it's going to cover all 4 years of college costs. But again, when real investment numbers, when you look at ups and downs of how that money is invested and grows and declines, well, the reality is you're only going to have about 2 years of that coverage based on the numbers that they use. Okay. For the private school, it's even worse because we're looking at saying, hey, you're going to be putting in $1,200 a month. The anticipation is it's going to cover over $800,000 a year, or $800,000 for college. But again, that's on compound growth. That's not how investing really works. So you get there and you're only about $500,000 short, right? Where's the rest of that money going to come from? So that is one of the big problems that I have about how advisors kind of pitch money growing in this compound form, but then also because they pitch it that way and they say, this is how much you need to save, they're trying to create a plan, but the plan they're establishing very often fails. So the other piece that you have to understand about a 529 is that it can decrease financial aid. And financial aid is any money that you receive from colleges, from the government, right? Any money that helps you pay that bill. Now, the first thing you need to understand about financial aid is something called your expected family contribution, or EFC, or now they just made a change to the FAFSA. It's called the Student Aid Index, or SAI. So this is a number you answer questions about your income, your non-retirement assets. There's an additional form. Most of you probably know what's called the FAFSA, but there's another form called the CSS profile. Different questions, different formula. They will ask about the equity you have in your primary residence, where the FAFSA does not. The other piece is that once you put these numbers into this formula, it basically says, this is what we calculate you can afford for just 1 year of college. Now, whatever that number is that expected family contribution, or student aid index. If you're applying to schools that have a cost of attendance, COA, what the school all-in cost is for 1 year, that's tuition, room and board, fees, books, everything. If it is more than your EFC, you are eligible for need-based financial aid, okay? The higher your EFC number goes, the less financial aid you are eligible for. And that is a big piece that I hope you guys understand how financial aid can work. There's a lot more to it. I can do a whole episode just based on financial aid, but that's what you need to know. So does a 529 increase your EFC, your SAI? The answer is yes. It is considered a non-retirement account. So it's going to increase your EFC by about 5%. Okay. Now that's, again, going to end up being per year. So in other words, if you have $100,000 in a 529, the school is going to say you can afford $5,000 more per year. Okay. So that means that you might pay $20,000 more for college because of that 529. So if I use kind of some of the numbers that I explained on this state school kind of strategy, if a family puts in, $450 a month, well, let's just say that they have one child and they make $200,000 a year in what's known as the base year. And that starts January 1st of sophomore year and ends December 31st of junior year. That is the tax year that the schools are going to use to calculate your EFC. That's what your income is based off of. So they put this money into a 529, $250 a month, and it grew to $138,000. Okay, the original plan was we're going to use this for state school, but now 18 years later, their kids are looking at really expensive private schools. Those are the schools that are the best fit. We're talking about, really good student here. I also put some numbers in here, like their home is worth $500,000 and they have a mortgage balance of $250,000, because again, at these private schools, that can have a factor. Now, a lot of these private schools with big numbers, right, big costs, also meet 100% of need or really close to it. So in other words, what that means is if there's a gap between their cost and what they think you can afford, they will meet 100% of that in grants and scholarships. So that's what what they say, this is what you can afford. They will make up the difference, and that's what you'll pay, just what they basically state you can afford. So in this case, with these numbers, right, the EFC at these private schools to meet 100% of need with their income, with their assets, is about $57,000 a year. Hey, all right, very good, we think. Because if the school costs $80,000, that means they're going to get almost $23,000 of financial aid, need-based financial aid. But the piece that we have to understand is that 529 actually increased their cost, right? So if they used a vehicle that was not in a 529 or not what we'll call assessed in the financial aid formula, well, now their EFC would have been 51,600, meaning that's what they would pay. So they would actually receive about $6,600 more in financial aid, which would drop the price down about $6,600. On top of that, there is very specific financial aid planning that you can do. And that's what I help all my families with, is to basically make that picture look as good as possible. And the reality is a family with these numbers could have that EFC number as low as 44,600 a year, right? And now we're talking about significant savings. We're saying, all right, if you did things the wrong way, you're paying $57,000 a year. If you did things the right way, you're paying 44. That's a significant savings over 4 years of college. So 529s, if not used the right way, can actually have you pay more for college than less. Now, outside of that, we're basically looking at, I want to take a look at like a real life situation too, because I did have this come across. I have a family that I'm working with. So they have twins. That's their only kids. And for about 15 years, they were putting $1,000 a month away into a 529. Or $1,000 a month they would save and then make a contribution at the end of the year, about $12,000. Over the course of those 15 years, the account grew to $278,000 when they put in 180. So it had about $93,000 worth of gains. And again, those gains are tax-free if it's used for qualified education expenses. They also, again, when you, certain states, not all states, but the state that they live in Pennsylvania, they would get some tax savings on the state side because of that. So over the course of 15 years, there was about $4,300 less in state taxes that they paid. And if you were comparing this investment vehicle to, just a typical mutual fund that you would have to pay capital gains tax on, they saved about $26,000 in that potential tax. So over the course, they built this money up, it grew. Well, how much did they actually save from taxes? Just over $30,000 is essentially what they're going to save from the tax perspective. Now, to get into that in more detail, when they're 48 years old, their kids were seniors now. In their base year, this family made $150,000. That was their, adjusted gross income. But the twins are now really looking at high need met, very high priced schools, private schools. They're looking at schools like Ivy League level educations, Franklin and Marshall, Swarthmore, Gettysburg, right, Bucknell. So they're looking at schools that have a very high sticker price, and all of these schools meet, over 95% of need. A lot of them meet 100%. So using the CSS profile with this 529 balance, their EFC was $33,308. So that means when they get accepted to these schools, each kid is going to be paying $33,000 a year, right? Or maybe a little bit more, but less than $35,000. And a lot of these schools that are on their list, no matter how great the student is, they do not offer what's known as merit-based scholarships, meaning, if you got great grades or a great SAT, they are not giving you any extra money. You just get accepted. So they only give money based on your family's finances. Okay. Now the 529 over the course of the 4 years would cover the cost of college. So good there. But the reality is that what this 529 strategy actually cost them is that their EFC was increased by over almost $6,700 per year per child. Okay. So the 4-year cost based on these numbers is expected to be around $133,000 per child. So $266,000 total for their twins' education. Now, if the 529 money was saved differently, if it was saved in a vehicle that was not assessed in the financial aid formula, they would have paid $212,000. Okay, so they would have paid about $54,000 less. Now, 529 has those tax advantages, but guess what? You can also get the tax advantages if you plan the right way using other vehicles. And so even if we just straight up said, well, the increased cost of college minus what I did save in taxes, you actually end up overpaying almost $25,000 more for this education. The reality is you plan really the right way, you overpaid by over $55,000 for that education. And that's really one of the big issues that I have with advisors and how they plan using 529s is they don't take into account what the true increase of college cost and the decrease of financial aid that you would have. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, then Joe, hey, if you met with these people 15 years ago, what would you be doing? Well, again, I don't know the exact strategy, based off of this family, what it was 15 years ago, but I can tell you that if you strategically still use that $12,000 a year and you use a combination of Roth IRAs, life insurance, tap into your home equity strategically, and all of these vehicles have to be used very strategically. But if you can build a plan around that 15 years before college, well, I can tell you that you would end up paying for these schools less than $20,000 a year with this family situation. That means that the total cost for two kids would be $155,000. That would be $110,000 less than what they're paying, right? That is reality. And the other side of that, when they're 60 years old, kind of running the numbers, you look and say they could have a Roth IRA balance over $300,000. They could have their mortgage paid off, and they could have a life insurance policy that has another $120,000 or so of cash value, right? That can be used for them for whatever purpose. So again, you can see if I was building a plan for this family, if they came to me 15, 16 years ago, you can see 529s would not have been involved in this family because I would have known that if they saved in a 529, 15 years down the road, it would cause them to pay more for college. So we would build up assets that are not assessed in the financial aid formula to have them pay as little as possible. So beyond that, there are some good uses of 529 plans. And by far, what I think is the best use is when you take advantage of something called the 5-year gift tax provision. So with the 5-year rule with a 529, you can put up to 5 years of whatever the gift tax exclusion is that year into a 529 one time, right? So this year, the gift tax exclusion is $18,000. So if you multiply that by 5, you can put $90,000 into a 529, but that is also per donor, per beneficiary. So mom and dad could each put $90,000 into this, and you could put $180,000 into this 529 plan. And hey, best time to do that is when the child is, when they're born or when they're young. Now, obviously not everyone can do this, but this is where a 529 can be phenomenal, right? You're going to give it 18 years of growth and never put money into it again, just one time when the kid is born. That is a very good use of it. And there's also some phenomenal estate planning that can be done with 529s that people don't actually truly understand. Right. So if maybe mom and dad don't have a lot, but a grandparent wants to make this type of contribution, or grandmom and grandpa, they put $180,000. They can almost create a family type scholarship for all of their grandkids. Very, very interesting. But you still have to manage those expectations. Again, if you look at a 7.4% compound rate of return, right, 18 years from now, we would basically say, oh, well, I put in that 180 and it grew to over 600,000. Again, you have to plan on that there's ups and down years, right? So the reality is, hey, that money might be worth about 400,000. Still a phenomenal, strategy that all of that gain, right? The, potentially $300,000 of gain is all tax-free. That is a very good use of how a 529 can use. But again, make sure you're managing expectations. If you're expecting an extra $200,000 to $300,000 in this from when you first put it in, that might change things down the road. So the worst, that's kind of the best case, but I also wanted to highlight where I see the worst uses of 529 plans. Number one, it's when you're basically putting in anywhere between like $50 to $200 a month, right? And you do it early. Without a doubt, even the worst case is when you start putting money into a 529 when your kid's in high school. It's not going to get the real advantage of the growth, right? And again, you could potentially lose that money when you need it to be there in a short amount of time. So you can't be risky with that money when you have such a short time horizon. But I see this all the time where families put away for 10, 15, 20 years, $50 a month into a 529. When we end up getting to school, a couple things happen. Number one, because of our 529 balance, there may be some schools that are now too expensive. we can't go to them because our 529 balance is assessed in the financial aid formula. And now a school costs $20,000 more, like some of the examples that I showed you. And mom and dad have to say, you can't go to that school, right? Because we can't afford it. That's one of the worst things that you see. But the biggest problem that you usually find is that you put money away for the 529, and then when that bill arrives and you see what you have to pay, you have enough to pay for year one, but there's no plan or strategy to pay for year 2, 3, and 4. And now you're left with the only option is to borrow and take loans or make your student take loans. And that's one of the problems that we see a lot now, because a lot of students are graduating with way too much debt that they cannot start their adult lives off the right way. So this is why I say a 529, just putting money into it, that's not a plan, right? So you kind of say a 529 savings plan. It's not savings, it's investment, right? It's investing. It can go up and down in value. That's investing, not saving. And it's not a plan, right? You need to actually have a plan. And that's where I see the worst part about 529s and where they ultimately fail for a lot of families. So who is a 529 great for? A 529, honestly, I say it's for families that you do have a very high adjusted gross income, like $250,000 or more when your kids are born, right? Unless you know that that 250 is not going to increase in value or in income over time. That's going to be higher each year. But if you're just having kids and you're making over 250,000, the reality is, hey, 15 years from now, you're going to be making more than that. And most likely, you're not going to qualify for need-based aid. So a 529 can be a good vehicle for you. Also, if you have a big lump sum of money that you can put away and let that sit and grow for anywhere from 15 to 18 years, like I said, that $180,000, that is very, very good. Also, if you only have one, maybe two kids, but those two kids will not be in school at the same time. So if there's like a 5 or 6 or 7 year difference between the two children, that also plays a factor into when you can use a 529 the right way. Now, who is it not good for? Well, a family that if you make under $250,000 a year, if you have 3 or more kids, if you're going to have 2 or more kids in school at the same time, right? Those are all factors that play big roles in the financial aid formula. And with those, you do not want to be making school cost more, right? You want to pay the least amount as possible, but paying the least amount possible does not always mean you find the cheapest schools. The cheapest schools and what you pay out of pocket could be the ones with the biggest sticker price, but you have to plan appropriately. All right. The last group of people that I would say is a 529 is definitely not the right way to save for college are those of you that are family business owners, right? You own your own business. It's a small family business. There are so many different strategies that you could use to keep your EFC low, right? You have control over what goes on a tax return, what the expenses are within the business, who you hire. There are a lot of very interesting strategies from the tax perspective that is you can lower your income on what you have to show to schools. Having 529s that are now assessed can really hurt you. So if you're a business owner, I can tell you 529s are really not a very good vehicle to use to save for your kids' college education. And what I want to lastly leave you with is some questions, right? The first list of questions, these are questions you need to ask yourself before you invest in a 529 plan. Number one, how much do you want to actually pay for school? Meaning you are setting a goal on how much you want to cover. Do you want to cover 100%? Do you want your kids to have some skin in the game, but not a whole lot? Or are you going to be saying you're responsible for this? But you need to have a goal that you're going to work for. Plan with the end in mind. With that, you also have to say to yourself, how much debt are you okay with your child graduating with? That is a major question that not many parents are ever asked, right? Are you comfortable with 30,000, 50,000, 100,000? At what point are you going to say, I don't want my kid graduating with that much debt, simply because you have to plan then, well, the money that the school is going to cost, the difference has to come from somewhere. You need to plan for it. You also need to know what schools you're planning for. And look, I'm not saying that every first grader that you need to know, I'm going to University of Pennsylvania, or I'm going to force my kid to go to Westchester, Shippensburg, Bloomsburg, right? Or Penn State. I'm not saying you need to know, but you need to say, is there the possibility that I want to plan for state schools? Am I planning for private schools? Or we really don't know, but we don't want to be 15 years down the road and have to tell our kid, you cannot go to that school, right? You have to ask yourself those questions because, again, saving the wrong way 18 years ago when you're applying for colleges, what you did 18 years ago may make that school unaffordable or lead to somebody going into debt or potentially, hey, I don't want to be the parent that says you can't go to that school you worked so hard to get into, and now I have to push my retirement back, right? You have to ask yourself, will 529s affect my aid eligibility? Okay. And the other big question is, well, if the 529 doesn't perform the way that you thought it would, and now it only covers 1 or 2 years of college, and there's a gap that still needs to cover those last remaining years, what is the plan on how you're going to cover that? You have to ask yourself those questions. And if you're working with an advisor, I can tell you that you have to ask these questions as well, which is, what will colleges cost when my kids get there? How much your college is going to be? And I usually recommend to pick 3 or 5 schools and a mix of private schools and public or it's in-state and out-of-state schools. You also should ask the advisor, what is your EFC or SAI? If they look at you sideways, they're not the right person to give you guidance on how to properly save for college. You also should ask them, what is the difference in your EFC or SAI between the FAFSA formula and the CSS profile formula, because those are also very different. If somebody says your EFC is $50,000 or going to be $50,000 based on the FAFSA, but you're looking at schools that are CSS profile, there's a chance that CSS profile could be $30,000 or $80,000, right? The numbers that go into those formulas are different and the calculations are different as well. So you have to ask them to tell you what your EFC is and what your SAI is for the FAFSA and the CSS profile. Again, if they don't do that, they're not going to be able to properly give you the right advice on how to save for college. If they do kind of pitch the 529, you have to ask, okay, how much will that increase that expected family contribution on the FAFSA and on the CSS profile? They have to be able to answer that question to, again, give you sound, solid advice moving forward. Ask them, if the 529 plan doesn't perform as you laid out, how will I cover the remaining costs? And if their answer is, I don't know, loans, well, again, that's not somebody that's planning for you. That's somebody that's just trying to take your money and make a commission off of the fees and not necessarily give you a solution. It's not actually solving any of your problems. It's solving a portion of a problem, not all of your financial problems, and really hurting you from achieving financial freedom and retiring when you want. And then the last question I was asking, if it's not 529s, what are the other ways that I can save for college, right? And if they're not exploring every option, like I said, equity in your home, Roth IRAs, and life insurance, if those vehicles are not even discussed, then that is someone who is not exploring every option for you to help you achieve your goals, right? There is more than one way to skin a cat for the college game, but every financial vehicle has pros and cons. Market risk, liquidity, taxation, market risk, how it's assessed in the financial aid formula, how you take money out to pay for college. All of those pieces play a major role in understanding what is best for you. And if you're going to work with an advisor, they have to be able to answer all of those questions and lay out what vehicles are right and wrong and why. And if they're only focusing on one, that is not the right solution. You cannot let how you want to save for college, let someone say, well, I've only used a hammer, and no matter what your situation is, you're the nail, and that's my solution. Your situation may not be the nail, but they only have one problem solver, and it might actually be the worst tool for you and your family, because it may cause you to pay more for college, or you don't have enough to cover that college bill, and you're left with a mountain of debt that someone has to cover. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's presentation. Please feel free, if you have any questions at this point, I would say leave them in the comments, and we'll give it a couple minutes here before I shut it down. Yeah, I had a good question here. It was, guaranteed savings plans instead of the investment piece. So if you're unfamiliar, a 529 guaranteed savings plan is one where you basically put money into, again, typically a state funded plan, and you buy credits based on what the tuition is today. Now, if the tuition increases, so does your account value, and then you can use that money to pay for tuition at a later time. I have a big problem with those guaranteed savings plans simply because I never see them really grow. It's a big issue because, again, here in the state of Pennsylvania, if you look back at the past 13 years, I believe it's 9 of the 13 years, tuition has been frozen. Now, when tuition is frozen, that means your account does not increase in value, but you still pay fees on that account. So a guaranteed savings plan, if you have one in Pennsylvania, has actually lost value. It's guaranteed, but still losing value. How's that possible? The other side of that is that while tuition is frozen at schools, well, the cost of room and board and their fees and books, everything else is still going up. So you're actually just separating the gap on what you thought you were covering for school, when essentially you are now left with a big gap on how and what you have to pay for college. So I'm not a very big fan of guaranteed savings plans. Again, in most cases, a 529, I think there's some great uses of them, but I have yet to see where a guaranteed savings plan actually truly paid off. The ones I have seen work well, again, are the ones where there's a significant amount of money dumped in, left, invested in the market over a long period of time. Those are the ones that are phenomenal. Do I have any suggestions on what 529s to invest in? No, I do not. And the reality is, I would say you have to, if you're trying to do this yourself, there's so many other aspects that you need to know, even if a 529 is right, long before you pick which 529 to choose, right? So I would say, no, I don't. Everybody's different, and there's some 529s that are more aggressive. Time horizon, things like that really play a factor into it. It's the same thing with, what mutual fund is the right one. I don't know. Right? That's not how I plan for my clients, unfortunately. So the answer to the question is talk with a specialist first on making sure that a 529 is right, and then from there, then you would choose based on how much you can put in, what your time horizon is, how aggressive or conservative you want that investment to be. That would lead you down the path. If a 529 is right, then what 529 to choose. But I would not say that there's one that is out there. Again, it's not a cookie cutter approach. All right, guys, I did go a couple minutes over here, so I think we'll shut it down at that point. Thank you so much for joining me. I will be back live in 2 more weeks. We'll figure out what the discussion will be, but if there's something that you would like to see a presentation on, leave me a message, leave it in the comment section. Be happy to always discuss. Please like, follow, and subscribe to this channel, whichever platform you are watching on. Also, I'm a co-host of a podcast called College Knowledge. Definitely would recommend taking a look at that as we really dive into the other side of higher education. We talk to professors and deans about the inner workings and how students should ultimately try and find the best fit school. So it's a great podcast I love being part of. And that is released typically weekly as well. Again, thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you all again in a couple weeks' time. All the best, guys. Take care.